What's going on, advocates? Welcome back to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Joined today with me is a special guest. I call him the King's Corners therapist, but I know he goes by many other monikers in different capacities of what he serves his community. But I'll introduce anybody, brother. So I'll let you introduce yourself and let people know why they should listen because of the credentials you about to bring to the table.
My name is Dana Davenport. I am here in Richmond, Virginia. I am a licensed professional counselor, certified sex offender treatment provider, and also a certified clinical trauma professional. So, um, for my mom, I'm her baby boy. Um, and for my community, I'm the listening ear and the advocate, and those are the things I don't take for granted and I hold dear.
So when I finally got to get a chance to dig into some of the juice that you bring to the table, you've been in this game of like just hearing and helping your community for 17 years.
Yes.
What was the start like? Did you ever see yourself get to this point?
I didn't, and I think about that. Actually, I've been doing this for like we're gonna say 25 years now. 17 years as far as where I am, but 25 years altogether. And I did not see myself doing this.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, there were a whole lot of I'm not doing this. I will not be doing this, and all those things. But then life kind of pushes you in a direction where you best fit.
Yeah, and so you said it was 25. All right, so being in the juvenile justice system 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that experience
Yeah.
and about you being in the juvenile justice system.
Um, so I started right out of college. I started working at Vision Quest.
Mm.
And if you're familiar with Vision Quest in Pennsylvania, um, that was my first experience. And I can tell you right now, college classes and all those courses didn't teach me what I was going to be seeing when I walked into, and walked into that place, into the presence of the kids I was working with. And, you know, it was sort of a real wake up call, I should say, because it was like this is more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Um, but I learned that I actually like doing it. I actually like working with kids. I didn't want to admit that, but I did. I like working with kids. I did not want to admit it. I was like, whoa, this is not it. But the first time that really came to light in reference to me being a counselor was there was a kid who would not open up to the psychologist he was working with at all. But one day he opened up to me and started talking about some things he hadn't talked about. I had no idea what to
Mm.
do with that. So I started to really look at like, why did he open up to me? I started to really kind of go into myself. It would still be another 10 years before I even got to the point of saying, hey, you know what? I think I need to go take this to the next level as far as doing what I need to do. But that moment was kind of like the first, like, oh, spark that, you're good at this. You're okay. You can make this happen.
What what are some misconceptions that I wouldn't say adults, but just like caregivers or children have? Like, I think, for example, some of the time they like we need to bridge the gap between the youth and different generations, but it's like, but they don't want to listen and they don't want to hear this and da da da. What is some misconception that different generations can talk to can learn from the youth?
That it doesn't matter who's in front of you, you should listen to them. And that's a misconception there because it does matter who's in. If you're not speaking my language or you're not listening to me, as far as a lot of the kids I've talked to, they're like, older folks don't listen to us. They push us in the background or they already labeled us as something else. They don't listen to us. So why should we listen to them? And the misconception is that like, listening. I don't have to listen to you. You're young. You don't know anything. A lot of these kids know more than what we give them credit for. Two is every kid from the hood is, pretty much criminal minded. Not the case. And so, when people, basically talking to people as far as who they are versus where they're from, really trying to go into look at it and say, hey, you know what? Um, I respect you. I'm hearing you and I understand, where you're from doesn't pretty much really define who you are. And the other thing is definitely that these kids pretty much only want to do what they want to do. A lot of them want to learn. A lot of them want to hear from other people. A lot of them want to be mentored. A lot of them want to be supported. But, you have to be able to understand, and bridging the gap is a word. People say, oh, bridging the gap, but there are a lot of people with different ideas on what bridging the gap looks like. And for me, bridging the gap is sitting down, being involved, understanding, really not judging, but also gaining trust and going out there saying, hey, you know what? If I'm going to support you, I'm going to support you. But I'm also going to sit down here and tell you and hold you accountable if you, out of pocket or you're doing something that basically, doesn't really jive with what you're trying to.
Uh-oh, I might have lost you. I might. Oh, you back?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
No,
here.
but you were making some great points with that, and I feel like in a space of like, and I'm learning that as a father now, and I'm curious to what you tell young men, like, discipline is one of the things that I'm trying to instill, but I also got to respect him I got two sons, respect him as a young man, and not wanting to like use that power dynamic, but also being respectful to that. How do you navigate that as a man of like being, like you said, I'm gonna tell you like it is, but I'm also going to give you some techniques and things like that as well.
I think I start out with um, um, so who are you? So if I met you, I'm just meeting you and I'm talking to you. Tell me who you are, and let's start the conversation there. I want to listen to what's really going on. Um, and I walk into it where I don't have preconceived notions about what someone has done or what I think they may have done. I want to hear why they've done it. I want to hear what got us here. So we start talking about that, and then we go into um, pretty much responsibility, accountability. How does that look for you? And why is it hard sometimes? Um, a lot of the young men I encounter, it comes down to, well, my family wants me to do this, my friends want me to do this, and I was like, what do you want to do? And we start talking about that. So empowerment is definitely a word, and it's definitely a thing. And also, coming back into um, responsibility, accountability. What is responsibility? What is accountability? And how do these things equate into success and avoiding issues? And honestly, I know it's real easy to go out there, and I tell people, I say it's real easy to go out and tell these kids, hey, avoid getting into trouble. My approach goes into how do you survive the streets and be able to get to a point where you can be successful and move in a direction where you're going to actually not repeat the cycle, so to speak. And we start talking about that. And for me, this is where my my upbringing comes into play of having been in the streets and having seen a lot of things, to go out there and be able to talk about them and say, hey, survival is survival. But I want you to be able to survive where you can live, not just be in situations where you're kind of forced to do some things you don't want to do. Let's talk about how do you lean on people? How do you create good a good support system? And where do you go from there as far as being able to take care of yourself?
Man, you bring up an interesting topic because you said you use some. That's where your experience comes into play, and you can be able to reach and have a conversation with them. But to give a little pushback, I feel like we have a continuous cycle of like even at the time of this recording, like there's a bunch of rappers just got picked up, right? They were doing a lot of the things in the community where it would be causing damage, but it's also celebrated in the music, it's celebrated in the lifestyle, things like that. And it's almost like an endless cycle of like, how do we even get out of that or can we get out of that will of cycle of trauma?
You can. And when I say as far as where I go, because I couldn't get in trouble. You know, my mom did a lot to keep us out of certain things. So I had to understand my decisions. So I go into easy a lot of times isn't always the best way to go. Sometimes you're gonna have to work through them. Sometimes you're gonna have to problem solve. So getting and for me, this is sort of the thing that's been successful. Street smart kids are smart. And I always tell them, you know how to survive. You know how to go out there and do the things you need to do. You've lived this long. But let's talk about how you get to a point where you stop going in that direction and really, you know, all the games and all the hustling and everything else. But you start to use this in reference to how do I go through and really channel this into something positive and being able to do it. And I always say, when we always say the village has to come into play. So for a lot of these kids, especially these boys, we have to build a village. And the village may not look like family, but the village is committed to be there, to say, you know what? I got you. If you call me at this time of night, hey, you know what? I got you. If you need this resource, you know, hey, I got you. If you're hungry, call me. I will make sure you eat. And finding those people for the kids that we have, and then trying to developing a bond and developing some trust is work. But if you do it early enough and you do it, if it's consistent enough and they buy into it, then usually we see them really go the other way versus going the way we see a lot of these rappers go.
So say I'm a young man who I only know my family, I only been around a certain environment. What's my first steps to develop in my new village?
The first steps to developing your new village, we start talking about who are the people in your life that have been there that you feel as though are safe people and you trust. And we start talking about that. And you bring up a point where a lot of the young men I work with, a lot of times their village is broken. It's fragmented and it's in different places. So we start to go back and really look at who's there and who's willing to take a chance. And then we start to define roles. What role is this person going to play in your life that you're comfortable with them and that they're comfortable playing and that you're okay with them being that person? So it sometimes it's tough. Sometimes the village is about three people, you know, but those three people, you know, we had to say, you know, hey, you're gonna play an important role. And then the part that comes into it to say these are the boundaries and these are the things in which I want to go through and really see you do. Are you okay with that? So we start to really, you know, work with them on how do you talk to your village and how do you get resources out of your village? And then also, how do you get resources from other places? And being able to go out there and use those things and not feel embarrassed about it. That, you know, you're asking, it's not a handout, you're getting help. You know, everybody needs help. Everybody gets some type of help as far as going forward. Don't be embarrassed about it. You know, go out there and do the things you need to do to keep you from doing the things that got you locked up or got you in trouble. Let's start looking at some other ways to go out there and help out as far as where you are. And it's tough. Sometimes POs are like, yeah, I would definitely be a part of the village, and not in the capacity of I'm just gonna try to lock you up, but in the capacity of after you get off probation or parole, I'm still gonna be a person you can call.
And I'm thinking about that in a capacity aspect too. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of men, people in general, women like who want Dana and as their supporters, as their village, but your
Mhm.
capacity is already lifted or almost is at capacity. Your capacity is at
Mhm.
capacity. How do you
Mhm.
navigate as a person who wants to help and be supportive, but you are only one human being?
I am honest with myself. I'm very honest with myself. And also, I understand tough decisions, and I want to do more, but I know my limits, and I actually talk about that with the clients that I work with, especially with the kids. I talk about that, but I always tell them, hey, you know what? I still have a phone. I always have time to have a phone conversation. I will always have time to do that. I'm not coming out to meet you at midnight or something like that, but you can ring my phone to say, hey, I'm having a tough time. We'll talk about that and I'll get you in contact with resources to go out and do what you need to do. I think I've been around long enough now and working with other people that I know a lot of places that um, are willing to go through and really help out kids and really help out our kids. And especially when they're saying, hey, you know what, if they're trying to do the right thing, we'll be there for them. And so um, no, I'm honest with myself. I already know. I am not. I did that. Them years are gone. Those years are gone. They are not there. No. Mm-mm.
You talked about it earlier about being in the juvenile justice system, probation, parole, pre-trial.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I've
Mm-hmm.
been the only time I've seen the only time I've seen those type of people was in trouble. When I had a
Okay.
friend in trouble, when I had
Mm-hmm.
to support someone or whatever the case may be. What's your perspective on like being a part of the system and having to almost like save our young our youth or be a part of that? Like, talk about your experience in that capacity.
Going into it, my first years, I was just like everybody else. These people are bad. They did something wrong. They deserve to be locked up. This person is where it was. And then something started to click when I started to see people I knew,
Mm.
and that I started to understand and hear stories. And then I started to learn about trauma. And I started to learn about pretty much, all those other things like childhood trauma and adverse experiences and all the other things that kind of went into that. So I started to approach it differently. And I remember around 2006, it started to click like um, when I started to see people kind of pass people off, people who actually could use help and needed help. And then when I started to see people who got in trouble who had money be able to skirt the system and do things that people who didn't have money had. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. That if this person and this person had the same charge, but this person had money and they were able to skirt the system and this person didn't. So what's going on here? So started to really look at that from a different standpoint. Actually, um, before people started saying, "Oh, let's approach this from a trauma-informed standpoint," I started to approach it from a trauma-informed standpoint to say, "Let's talk about what's really going on and what's happening here." And then what really brought it home for me was I was working pretrial. I was seeing a client in my office, and and this was a grown man. He had a full, he had a full flashback um, of his father beating his mom and in my office. And he started to have, and I actually had to work through and bring him back to reality, understanding fresh off the trauma training.
Mm.
Hey, just going on, hey, I need you to, we're here today, it's this day, really kind of going back and bringing him back to, being grounded in reality as far as what's going on. And it shook me a little bit, but I was also like, okay, now I see what trauma really is, and I understand, how it looks in action. So, just started to approach it from that standpoint. There, really understanding. A lot of people started to become very angry with me because I started to advocate more for, we can't just lock this person up because this person has not had these experiences growing up. These things are triggering them. They're doing it right here. Why can't we give them a chance to go through and do a substance abuse program versus, just say he came with a dirty urine, let's just lock him up. So it started to really, started to work in that part. And then, when I finished grad school and I started going back to work with juveniles as a therapist, it was, a much different thing. So going in and really looking at understanding, which they don't teach in grad school sometimes, understanding that kids who are forced into therapy and have to sit in front of a person who is doing work with them, who feels as though they know everything, and these kids just listen to them because they're going to cure them and they're going to walk away. And if the kids go out there and do something and relapse or recidivism, recidivate, whatever, as far as what they're doing, it's that kid's fault. It's not theirs. So it's like, wait a minute. So how are we approaching this again? So people started not like me because I advocated more. I did my thing, but I advocated a whole lot more because I was like, you know what? Let's bring in this right here, especially for Black and brown kids. And that really, I can tell you right now, I've gone into courtrooms where, Commonwealth attorneys and judges were ready to lock me up.
Wow.
Because I was advocating. But I was sitting there saying, I wasn't giving the ground. I was like, no, this is basically what we are. This is really what's going on. Finally, when people started to become more trauma informed and catching up, I was already there. So it started to really work in the favor of like, okay, now, people are saying, oh, we're not just gonna lock you up. We understand adverse childhood experiences have a lot of effects on how your behavior. The fact that you saw all these things growing up and now we're dealing with you here. But, still on that side, I read a lot. I read a lot. I really talk a lot. I really, I sit in trainings and everything else to go through and make sure that I'm up on where I need to be. And then also, because I want to make sure that I'm serving as many people as possible with the best information possible going forward. And a lot of therapists within the system don't do that. They get the same training and the same type of training. And it doesn't, and I can tell you right now, with being with DJJ for all those years, we didn't get cultural competency or cultural diversity or cultural, humility training as therapists. You got trauma training, that generic trauma training, but you didn't get that. So when I started to introduce those things into it, we go out there and saying we have more Black and brown kids in the system. So why are we doing things pretty much on this generic level? We're not doing things on this level here. So my advocation, as far as for kids, advocating for kids, and then also looking at how we actually practice and how we work. It's a lot of work. A lot of people aren't gonna like you, but a lot of people are going to respect you at the end of the day with that. So that was my journey from going there, and now where I am, still advocating, still doing the best as far as what I need to do, but also teaching. That's been added. So since 2019, I've been promoting and teaching and going in and working with especially my colleagues to talk about how do we approach these kids who don't look like us, and what do we do when when the trauma is Black or brown.
You make up so many interesting points, and I want to make sure I can capture as many. What? Okay. So I'm thinking of it from a person who isn't Black and brown. Mm-hmm. What benefit is it to me if why do I have to care? You get what I mean? Like, is that my kid? Yeah. This training is working for me. These things are working for my system. Why do I have to care about this?
If the outcomes are horrible, and you're putting your name on it to say, I did this work and the outcomes are horrible, can you live with yourself?
Mm.
And that's the question I always ask, because I was like, yeah, I have to go into court and I have to tell somebody I did the work. And then 3 months or 4 months later, I hear the outcome is horrible. So how, so what can I do to go out there and do that? And yeah, sometimes people make bad decisions, but if it's consistently bad decisions, it can't be consistently bad decisions. A lot of times it's how we approach it and what we do with it. And when I talk about, when we talk about that, it's like, um, when we're addressing, some people were afraid to address certain kids um, about the traumatic events of their lives because they became angry or they became avoidant. So they said, we're not going to address it because they're not ready to address it. And I was like, let's talk about a response to trauma as far as how they're used to dealing with that part. And I said, let's talk about manhood and masculinity and how that approach was for Black and brown kids. You just need to take the pain and walk it off and suck it up. Don't tell nobody what you saw. Deal with it internally and keep on going. And we talk about that with those people, to say, why should it matter? Because when those kids go back home, they have to deal with all of that. And if they're not dealing with that, they're going to deal with the other stuff that's going to come. And pretty much we're going to see them pretty much, cycle back in.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about with the juvenile system, I wanted to make sure I highlighted to get your perspective. I feel like we are a part, going even back to slavery, we're a part of a system that wasn't built for us. And so was it hard for you to, well, you said you had to fight. How did you navigate every day dealing with that? It's like I'm fighting a bigger system, bigger than me, to save babies that I care about.
In my 20s, I learned that I used to say things to people who were making more money than I was, above my pay grade. And I didn't know how close I was to being fired. So I used to say, hey, you know what? If I get fired, I can't help people. So I need to figure out how to do this and how to move. So I started reading the code. I started looking at what we can do. And I actually started reaching out to resources that a lot of people didn't even know existed within the system, but they were like, yeah, we help kids too. We do this. We actually provide XYZ. So when we started to look at those things there, it's like, okay, cool. We're getting here. And then a lot of times my own pocket, to dig into my own pocket to pull out for kids who didn't have family and didn't have that family support. And they were like, here's $200. We're going to go buy you some clothes and pretty much put you in this group home. And I was like, you know what? I understand how things are. So I'm going to go buy you some flat kicks. I'm going to go, hit you up with a winter coat. And it's something small like that to go through and do and say, okay, it's appreciative. But, I felt like if you're going to walk the walk, if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk as well. And so I started to really look at, how can I reach out to people and build a network of people who are able to go out there and really, sometimes advocate for me. Or, go out there and say, hey, this kid needs this and they're doing this. And we'll have those people to come in and say, we want to meet with them, we want to talk with them, get permission, and they'll start advocating for that, for that kid. And so I found out that, hey, you know what? I started to learn the people who did things.
Who got stuff done.
And yeah, and new stuff. And then I started to understand the role of guardian ad litems, in court. So I was like, okay, cool. You know what? Let me get in touch with a couple of guardian ad litems. So you start to, in building that network and understanding how things work and who did what, started to look at, okay, how do I advocate? And I can advocate for these, but I can advocate and then branch off and and hand this over, to this person to go through and run with it. And also with getting, with kids who did have families, getting buy-in. Hey, would you like to do this? So what would you like to see, and how can we help you better go through and do do certain things? So really kind of like understanding the situation and then going from there. So um, being able to do that, but also being able to say for the kids who really needed the extra support, to be that person for them.
Hmm. You you said something important. Earlier you talked about how it's detrimental to the therapeutic relationship if the kid is being forced into therapy, as opposed to like being collective. And then you just spoke on um getting buy-in from the family. uh I don't know what the question is, but what's coming to mind is how important is family buy-in to an individual's healing?
It is so important. As a matter of fact, um, if you're only healing the person and not healing the family, and not have them involved in the healing part, then you're not really doing the work that's going to be long lasting. And we um, and I can say this with DJJ here in Virginia, um, becoming more family involved and making sure that the families are part of the healing process has been a thing that's been directed, to go through and do. So it's like if kids come in, if possible, the family wants to participate, we make it possible for them to participate in family therapy via video, via in person, depending on where they live. So it was like, yeah, that's a part of what you're going to do, and we're going to talk about this. And then you know, we having that connection, because we're taking kids away from families. If they're getting locked up, they're away from their family. So having them connect to their family as often as possible became, we didn't understand the importance of that, but we had to ask the question sometimes. If you're away from your family, you feel it.
Mm.
You start to have reactions to it. So imagine these kids who have despite, and in spite of how their families were perceived, they're still family. So connecting them with those families and connecting them with people who love them, and keeping them connected was paramount.
Mm. Switching gears a bit, you talked about earlier, working with individuals. Well, I'll just say it, working with
Mm-hmm.
sex offenders as a sex
Mm-hmm.
offender treatment provider. And I'm thinking about, you never talk about like it's society wise that the people that
Mm-hmm.
perpetuate these certain acts, they also
Mm-hmm.
need some type of, like, somebody needs to work with them as
Mm-hmm.
well. So how has
Yes.
that experience been, and what did you notice working with these individuals?
Well, that was also one of those nevers. I'm never gonna do this. That was a never. And 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 again, life kind of leads you into a direction. And I work with kids. I work with kids who offend. So for that right there, for me, it was more so, wow, I can do this. This work is taking me to a lot of places. And this work is really, actually, this work is the first trauma work in reference to kids that I had started doing. And then was able to branch out and do other trauma work with as part of there. So um it was it's not how people think. I think people perpetually say it can't be cured, there's no cure for that and everything else. And I go in and tell them, these kids are someday going to become adults. If you're
Mm,
going to look at it that way, then pretty much we're in trouble.
mm,
So and then two, circumstances and different circumstances call for as far as how we looked at it. They're individuals. A lot of these kids, when they finished our program, went on. The recidivism rate for kids who sexually offend in the nationally is under 5%.
mm,
When they completed a treatment program, or even did a treatment program or completed a treatment program, it's under 5%. And a lot of those kids, when they leave our program, we didn't see them again as far as locked up or anything else. A lot of them end up getting jobs. A lot of them end up, pretty much moving on with their lives. Some of them then return home with family, but a lot of them ended up we have several who were very smart, got full college scholarships, and were able to go to school and everything else. So for the kids that we worked with that were in our program, um, it was pretty much for the majority of them, you know, able to move on with their lives and never have contact with the system again. And that's pretty much been, that's consistently for the last 20, 25 years. Um, there are a few that were scared.
Mm.
And, they pretty much, um, like I said, the work that we did there and the work that I did really took me places and really took me pretty much. I understand the limits, I understand who I can work with, who I can't work with, and but also I understand too that when you're doing therapy and you're working with, whether I'm working with a a, a youth who's sexually offended, or I'm working with a youth who killed somebody. Um, I don't separate those two because I can't go out there and say, well, this is worse than that. I go in with the individual and I look and see where they are. And then pretty much, my takeaway as far as how I work with them goes from there. So it that work, yeah. I'm glad I took a break from it. It's been actually it's been a 9-month break at this point. And it's been much. It was good to actually take a break because, yeah, my therapist was like, I can't talk to you about that because I don't know how to handle that part. So I was like, okay, I got you. So I had to find an actual therapist who was able to sit down and actually work with me as my personal therapist, who was okay with talking about my work doing that.
Mm.
That's how that goes.
Mm. Well, I'll switch it because you mentioned it throughout this conversation, recidivism, and
Mm-hmm.
from you having a lengthy experience in it, and dealing with teens and seeing what's working, what's not worked. What has worked in your opinion to impact recidivism, and then what is more work that we need to do on our end as a community?
Let's see. What's worked? What's worked? Um, Following kids beyond just beyond parole and beyond probation, um, having reentry advocates and reentry organizations that also work with kids. And then we talk about rights restoration because a lot of our juveniles are convicted felons. They lose their rights. A lot of them have no idea that they lost their rights. So we start talking about rights restoration and getting juveniles into that part of rights restoration, understanding what that really means. Um, so a lot of those things have actually worked. Employment opportunities and actually our partners in employment who will hire convicted felons or people who have certain offenses on their records and and trainability and pretty much being able to look at housing as well. So housing, so and we don't look at that as important. Housing is important. Housing, especially for a lot of our juveniles coming out of the system, they don't have housing. Once they leave independent living, they have to figure it out for themselves. If a family member doesn't take them, they pretty much going to be scrambling in the streets, and back to where they were. And we were talking about survival. So housing, employability, and then reentry people to go out there and make sure that they're doing the things they need to do and they have support going forward. And then for those who have families, yeah, that helps. So all those things work in a nutshell as far as with that. What doesn't work, um, I think making it harder for people to really get those services or putting roadblocks in place to say, you know, in order to be in this employment program or in order to get housing here, you can't be a convicted felon. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, like, really, where are people supposed to live? So, a lot of the laws that are written in to go through and say, well, we're going to be selective as far as who we allow in here versus not really helping the people who actually need that. Um, and I'll talk about the Richmond area. A thing that really hurts people as well is the fact that a lot of the areas that are in lower income neighborhoods over here are food deserts.
Mm.
So people have to travel to go to a grocery store. So if you're not going to the grocery store, you're going to the corner store, which, for me, there's some good ones here. But for me also, and if you live in the neighborhood, you know which corner store you can go down and things will happen that pretty much are off the books or not illegal. And that causes that trouble there. So yeah, you have those things there. So food deserts and really food insecurity, all those things there really people not really going through and really addressing those issues, and then we see in those areas as well that we have a lot of recidivism. We have a lot of pretty much as far as the crime rate is higher. Recidivism rate for those neighborhoods, as far as people who live there, is going to be higher as well. Um, and and then I always like for the people who actually make the laws to actually come and sit with the people who are making the laws, that are affected by those laws, to really understand that, you know, if you haven't met me and you're making a law because you think it's going to be pretty much goddamn effective as far as whatever it is, you need to come sit to see how this is affecting my life.
No, that's a gem. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Of like, if you're making a law about me, I think about the marijuana laws and
Mm-hmm.
things as we locked up before as a
Mm-hmm.
community, but now they're changing it.
Mm-hmm.
But now is no impact in what that's talking about as a culture. But
Mm-hmm.
that's neither here or there. But I love that. As we close out, I had one more question before we
Okay.
close out. It's been a great conversation. It's actually one that you posted up on IG, but I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
bring it here to the conversation. You was talking about the dilemma of high functioning depression, and for those who are listening, that doesn't see the video, he posted a picture on Instagram with the caption: "High functioning people who seem to be able to do it all are most likely under immense pressure, and when things go bad, the ability to cope is difficult for them." Can you talk about what you meant by this post and what were you trying to, get people to understand?
Yes, and you're jumping into the king's corner on top.
Well, this won't come out for a few weeks, so it's cool.
Okay, that's cool. So let's talk about that in high functioning depression, high function, and when we see people who are just like they have it all together, they are organized, they are doing it all, they show up, they show out, and everything else. And then when something goes wrong with those people, you know, they fall apart, and we don't see that, and we can't understand or fathom that. Um, it's a thing where I think people who are expected to be just high functioning, I'm here, I'm doing all these things, I'm busy, I'm out here. People see me, people admire me, but they don't see the storm
Mm,
that you're covering up.
mm,
And they only see this, they see you smiling, they see you happy. And they don't see the pain.
mm,
And so when these people go home, and I'm gonna go to the story I just read, the superintendent, assistant superintendent in Maryland, you know, who had been there of the schools, she had been there for the longest time. They didn't renew her contract, and she was on point, excellent. They didn't renew her contract, and they found her dead.
mm.
And so stuff like that happens when we start talking about it and saying, like, wow, what was going on that I missed with this person? This person didn't look like, they didn't fit the bill of a person who was depressed. And we talk about high functioning depression and how, and a lot of times how we miss it with people. But then again, you wouldn't really know it unless you really know that person.
Mm.
And a lot of times we don't ask questions of people who seem to be able to do it all. We don't ask those questions of, are you okay? What's going on? Do you need help? Um, we only see them as they're happy. So you know what? Let them be happy. There's nothing wrong.
Hmm.
And then when the wheels fall off, usually the aftermath is, wow, how did I miss all this?
Wow. I was going to ask this, is anything you want to leave the people with before we go, but I think that might have been a powerful statement right there. So, is there anything you want to close us out with before we get out of here?
I'm going to say I am, and I don't get to say this a lot of times, but I am thankful for you and Doug. I actually discovered y'all during the pandemic, and it was just, like, okay, cool. Let me just sit in here, and just it was on point and on par with how I like to advocate, how I like to go out there and really work with people, and what I wanted to do. So it was kind of the perfect storm of a lot of things. And I really, love the work, and I really love King's Corner because you get to reach so many people, and I think just seeing how people respond to that has been great. And then coming back into looking at our own communities, um, and being able to say, what can I do here to really move towards getting men into therapy, and getting especially Black men to go out there and really do those things. And that pushes, the wheel is moving.
Yes.
you know the wheel is definitely moving, and we're seeing more of that, which I'm appreciative of, and basically people being more open and honest about the conversation. So definitely appreciate all of this.
No, and I thank you as well and for the work that you do. And again, I look at to y'all for guidance as I start to navigate my career and see what direction I want to impact and how I want to do it. This podcast was just one implementation of it, but I feel like when I talk to you all and I learn new things, it's like, all right, legislation, or where else can you take it to like really impact your community? So I
Mhm.
thank you for that. And for the audience, please make sure y'all share this interview with Dana, quoted whatever you like that he said, put it, leave a review on iTunes, like tell him, show the love so he can know that you valued all, he wasn't wasting time here, like you valued everything that he was sharing in this conversation. And please remember to subscribe and leave a review. Like, just do what you do to make this podcast go up so that way we can keep having these continued conversation. On that note, please remember that this podcast has never been about being a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.